Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome not just a very dear friend, a fellow member of the YPO, a very tall corporate leader from Australia, Sydney, Australia, Mr. Peter Ivany. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Very generous. Thank you.
Peter is the chairman of Ivany Investment Group, the person behind the success of Hoyts, which had 450 cinemas. He's a member of the Sydney Cricket Sports Ground Trust, chairman of NIDA, chairman of the Sydney Swans. He's the recipient of Australia's highest award, which is the Australian Order. And as I mentioned, he's a fellow member of the YPO. So, Pete, today we're going to talk about Israel and Palestine. And let me ask you the first question. What role do you think Israel plays in the broader Middle East region today?
Well, firstly, Israel's a democracy.
Yeah.
Secondly, Israel really represents Western values. So in a way, it's it's an extension of a lot of Europe and a lot of America and a lot of the values that we hold very close to us, including in India. But more importantly now, it's really a pawn for what's happening between Iran and its opponents in the Middle East, and between the Sunnis and the Shiites. So this Iran-sponsored war, Israel is unfortunately a bit of a victim of that, and so are the people in, the Houthis, the Hezbollah, and Hamas, who are being funded and radicalized in their population to be, to really to take vengeance and war against Israel, and in that sense also against the Jewish community in the diaspora. So Israel has a multifaceted responsibility, but in many ways it's the canary in the coal mine. It's like start with Israel first and then broaden to destroy Western values across the world. And clearly Iran now being supported by China, Russia, and North Korea is forming a bit of an axis against Western civilization.
Well said. And Pete, for a lot of my viewers and listeners who keep reading all kinds of news items, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about Israel, and how can some of these be addressed?
First misconception is that we're occupiers and colonialists. And Jews have been in Israel for 5,000 years.
Yeah.
This subdivision was granted in 1947 by the United Nations. And they're not oppressors, because what people also misunderstand is the highest proportion of Muslim population in any country where it's not the predominant religion is in Israel. I mean, Israel is 21% Muslim, right? Out of the 5 million odd people in Israel, not including the territories, 2 million are Muslim, or 7 million, sorry, 2 million out of 7. And they occupy they have full rights. They're in parliament. Their women have equal rights, clearly. They are represented in the army, and they're open to any job that's open to anyone who's Jewish. So if you look carefully during this latest war between Hamas and Israel, it's not really Gaza, it's Hamas. The Israeli Arabs have been very quiet. It's more Israeli Arab doctors than Israeli doctors. So people don't understand that Israel is a very pluralist society that includes people of the Muslim religion.
Well said, well said. And what would you say are some of the significant challenges facing Israel today?
Well, externally, Israel's a beacon for worldwide unrest, and for some reason it's very easy to concentrate in a very small part of the world to get your point across. So that's happened by this sort of axis that I mentioned before, aided and abetted by the left progressives throughout Europe and America and Australia, and also aided and abetted by some members of the extreme right. But that's been ongoing since pre-World War II and even before that. So externally, it has a huge challenge. The next challenge is Iran and its nuclear capability, and so to defend itself in secure borders. So the big challenge for Israel is to, be able to go to work every day and not worrying about their security. So that's a really significant challenge on an international front. So it's international opinion. They're the centerpiece of this axis against Western civilization and their security. So externally, they're the biggest challenge that's facing Israel.
Very well said. Great response. And, within the entire region, Israel's education system seems to stand out because of not just the incredible economic success, but the success of people from Israel succeeding all over the world. How has Israel's education system contributed to its success?
Well, it starts from the fact that if you're Jewish, you've been persecuted for 5,000 years. And you've been basically, extradited from countries, and everything's taken away from you. So as my grandmother said, they can't take your education away from you. So that if you're Jewish, the most important thing, worldwide, and that's true in Israel as well as it is in the diaspora, is to have a strong education, because that's the only thing that will save you. That's why we have disproportionate Nobel Prize winners, and we have such a successful country that's sort of comparable to what Singapore's done since during the same period.
Correct.
So education is critical. There's a very high percentage in Israel of people that are very good at maths, particularly that came from Russia. So you find that that's a really important skill for technology. And quite clearly, technology for us is not just a nice to have, it's what enabled us with 300 million people on our doorstep who don't want us to be there. It's enabled Israel to use its technology and brain power to stay ahead and to be able to, defeat, not all these people are enemies today, and we'll talk about that, but a number of them. So that intellectual brain power has really helped Israel and Jews around the world survive.
Well said. And how do you perceive the relationship between the diaspora and Israel evolving over the years? And what is the support the diaspora is giving to Israel today?
Yes, well, it's quite interesting, because in the beginning, the diaspora was critical to Israel's success, in terms of skill. In the 1948 war, the diaspora gave Israel pilots, so they actually helped to win that war. The diaspora has been very important financially, and it's been very important in its influence in government to help supportive governments support Israel. As Israel's got more independent and more powerful, the relationship between the diaspora has become more tenuous. And the diaspora has actually said, look, we really should look after things here at home more, because we're either Americans or Australians or English or French or wherever we're from. And Israel's now in a position to look after itself. And Israel's at the point saying, well, we survived the Second World War. We're a strong independent country. We're in the top 30 countries in terms of GDP. We have more companies per capita on NASDAQ than any country in the world, and we can survive on our own, so we need the diaspora less. But every time you get a confrontation like we've had, the unity between the diaspora and Israel becomes one. So all of us will now visit Israel during this period. We'll support them. Our important part of this support is not just financial, but advocating for Israel around the world, versus a lot of misinformation that's being spread about Israel that unfortunately is enabling this latent anti-Semitism to rise to the surface. And all of a sudden, people make two decisions in the diaspora. One, it's a conflict that's somewhere else that doesn't concern us. And number two, for the anti-Semites, it validates all their assumptions. So we in the diaspora have an important role in advocating the position and making sure that people don't walk away from, in a way, their responsibilities to Western civilization. Because as I said, we're the canary in the coal mine, we're first. But the second part of it is to explain and understand our position, to be quite frankly, amongst a very hostile press.
Well said, well said. So, Pete, I'm now going to move to another section for our conversation, which is Israel and Palestine, which is right now at the top of everyone's mind. But I want to go back, given the amount of understanding you have of this topic. And I want to ask you, can you provide an overview of the historical roots of the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, this is not an easy question because we're covering a lot of history. But this last version, so we're going to bypass the destruction of the first and second temple. We're going to start with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, when the British Mandate, which is where Palestine, called Palestine, which is where the name came from. It never existed before then, and nor did the PLO till I think the late 70s or 80s. As a result of the British Mandate, they took over from the Ottoman Empire, Israel, from 1917 to after World War I to 1947. They found that it just became a very difficult existence there because there was a lot of Jewish people lived there and a lot of Arab people lived there, and the same arguments as today: whose land is it? Put England under a lot of pressure as the head of that colonial empire to sort of navigate through the disputes and sort of control and have administration over what was called Palestine. So as a result of 1947, what was called Palestine then was divided up 55% to Jewish settlers and 45% to Arab settlers. Since that time, a number of Arab settlers fled and went into Gaza, went to other Arab countries, went to Jordan, but more of this happened, but a number stayed. And the 2 million that now have stayed have been very successful in Israel. It wasn't 2 million then, but has become 2 million. I said 20% of the Israeli population. Since then, there have been various wars, the larger ones, 1947 War of Independence, that Israel won. But after that, Israel had to absorb 1 million immigrants from the other Arab countries where all the Jews were thrown out, and they had to find a home in Israel. Then the Six-Day War in 1956 was a real war about the Suez Canal, and that had other countries involved apart from Israel. But in 1967, the Six-Day War, and that became the precursor to the occupation of what others would call of the West Bank, and parts of Gaza was really still controlled by Egypt at that point. Parts of Gaza, and then in 73, the 73 War, where they took parts of where there was other parts of the Sinai and other parts were then taken. So that was, and all these wars, were started by Arabs wanting the Jews to leave Israel and not allowing Jews to work, to live within secure borders. Since that time, and even before that, Israel did peace with Egypt in 1974. They then made peace with Jordan in 1994. In between that time, there was the Intifada, which was basically just continual insurrections in Israel with terrorist bombings in restaurants and bus stops and whatever. So that happened from 73 onwards. And I'm really cutting things short. The Oslo Accords, that were, there's many attempts. Oslo Accords, Ehud Olmert's peace resolutions. There was a number of trials for peace. There's the first Camp David, which was Egypt, but the second Camp David talks. So there's a number of attempts to get reconciled peace. In all of these attempts, Israel gave back nearly all the land, except there were a couple of bits of Jerusalem, the West Bank, that had to change because of the way it was. But net, all the land from 67 that was captured would have been given back. But at each time, for different reasons, including Rabin's assassination, the extremists of both cases didn't accept Israel at all under any secure borders. So we basically then continued, and that's been the major cause of the settlements in the West Bank. And then, of course, now we're culminating in 2013, Hamas's attack on Gaza. And as anyone most people listening to this would know, that we already had a two-state solution. Israel left Gaza in 2005 in the hands of Fatah. Fatah was ousted by Hamas in 2006, and they've governed with no elections from 2006 to now. They've militarized and they've radicalized their population. And that's where we are today, with money from Iran and Qatar and a number of other various close countries, and instead of that money going into building what in Gaza in the 1930s was a very successful, tourism area and a really an exciting hub. It was a bit like Lebanon into what's now a radical enclave.
Amazing. Pete, that's such an amazing summary of 100 years in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
I did
Uh,
my best.
uh, but tell me, what are some of the barriers that are preventing a lasting peace between Israel and Palestine?
I think it's always the extremist on both sides in
Yeah.
this sort of case. And I think the biggest issue for Israel is, quite frankly, particularly its far right and its religious right. But and they're in this government, they have disproportionate power. In the 40s, the religious people had 5% of Israel, and now because of the way their populations expand, they're now 20%. So that's part of the problem. But there's still 80% of other people that live in Israel, including Arabs that have votes that can vote them out. So that just depends on who's in power at the time. So then you get to the biggest problem for peace is there's the radical elements of the countries around it. And remember, in 2020, the Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco also signed the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
Remember that what's happened now, that from what I understand, Saudi was 2 weeks away from signing an accord with Israel. But they wanted to have a whole continuation of people representing the Sunni religion from Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, right through, basically against the Brotherhood, which is, that part of the Shiites, very strong in Yemen, Qatar, and Iran. So I think the biggest thing stopping peace in Israel today is the role of Iran, the role of their government, the eradication of the middle class in Iran at the behest of the clergy, and that sort of that government. Because I think if Saudi moved to form a bond with Israel, and then we're going to end up with a whole different situation. So I think the bigger issue in Israel, apart from the other issues that I've touched upon internally, is where Iran is. I think if Iran was neutral, so it really becomes a problem in the whole Middle East that Israel happens to be central to, because it used to be Israel's a common enemy, but now Israel isn't so much the common enemy. And if Saudi then has a rapprochement with Israel, and things change in Iran, then you will have a real opportunity for peace, and that can take many forms. The other problem is for Israel to do, after Gaza was a two-state solution. So Israel's not going to do they're not going to allow sort of complete freedom in a place like Gaza to be attacked, exactly like last time. Israel will be very concerned about the West Bank and the tenuousness of the Fatah government. Mohammed Abbas is 88 or 89. He's been there also for 20 odd years. So they'd be very worried because Hamas has got some very strong influences backed by Iran in the West Bank. So really, Saudi's part of it, Iran's a big part of it. And the final part is that if there was governments that could coexist with Israel, that would accept that Israel has a right to exist, then there's a real opportunity for a two-state solution. But what that means is that if you're Jewish and you live in the West Bank, you can stay there. You'll have a minority say in government, but you'll have freedom to practice your religion. Just the same as if you're Muslim in Israel, you have complete rights as if just your religion, just like in any other country, but you have complete rights. And that would also have to extend to Gaza. So it's got to be reciprocity. The other big thing that's holding back in the past peace negotiations is this right of return to Palestinians, which would then go back to this one-state solution, not Jewish. And Israel's been, as I said, extradited, expelled from so many other countries. In World War II, they had nowhere to go. where 60% of the Jewish population, or 50 to 60 in Europe, that was real genocide, not what we're talking about now. They were decimated. They won't let that happen again. So Israel has to stay as a Jewish state, but everyone has rights, but it has to stay as a Jewish state.
Well said. So I'm now going to move to some questions on the recent conflict, which is making news all over the world for the last year and a half or so. Pete, tell me, in your opinion, what were the primary triggers for the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas?
I think the main trigger was how close Israel was in negotiations with Saudi Arabia. Iran didn't want that to happen, and they've been successful in that. Somebody pushed the button with Hamas. They'd already been militarized and radicalized to a point that they were ready to go. Also, they get paid for every Jewish person they kill. So that's a huge incentive. In a country that has the lowest, very low income per capita. In fact, in the whole of the Middle East, the highest income per capita of the Muslim population is the Muslims that live in Israel, right? So that to me was the biggest trigger. So that's why it's really it's not what the media portrays it, but it's really part of this Middle Eastern, time bomb between the Sunnis and the Shiites. And in a way, Israel's a victim. Now, there's many other reasons put forward. It's partly Israel's fault. It's the settlements. It's this and that. And then the poor people they killed were the ones that asked for more Gazans to come in, who were all sort of really left-wing leaning, hardly political Israelis, who really want the two-state solution and really want peace. And they were the ones that were picked off because that's where the Gazans worked. They came back. They had all the records of those kibbutzim, and that's what they destroyed. So really it just makes whatever happens now, there'll be a militarized zone, as it has been with the West Bank. And unfortunately, in all of these places where you've got an enemy, you have to fence them off, which is a tragedy when you look at what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews, what happened between East and West Berlin. That's really the final failure, when you have to fence people off from each other and you don't have that free movement. But there was 50,000 Gazas going to Israel every day before the war. So I think it's more geopolitical and bigger. And when someone's paying all your bills, you're basically going to answer to them. They would have had more options of what to do with that money, because a lot of that money was designated for roads and education and a better life for Gazans. So Gazans' life, yes, they've got some money up front, but their lives have been destroyed by being run by Hamas.
And what is your perspective on the international community? And what can they do to help de-escalate the tension?
Well, the United Nations, since 2006, 45% of their resolutions have been against Israel. Now, I know Israel is an important part of the world, but it's not that important. So this whole thing is all captive to the progressive left, to a number of smaller countries that have decided to side against Israel, using the argument that they're oppressors, in the West using critical race theory that people haven't got a chance in life because they're just born the wrong way versus did they work hard or anything else. So all of this sort of stuff has come together. And so, the world's just split up into this have and have nots. And I think that's what probably most of the 100 countries against it. In the countries that are a bit more advanced, the top 20 countries in the world, the progressive left have taken over the agenda in many of them. And hence Israel in 1948 was incredibly well supported because the underdog had just undergone real genocide, where more than half its population had been obliterated, killed, murdered, whatever you want to call it. So it had a lot of sympathy from the left in the world, but not much from the right. But the right were pretty well, after what happened in World War II, the right were sort of very marginalised. Not everywhere in the world. South Africa, parts of the United States and the South, but most places the right were gone. So you end up, but now that Israel is successful, it's economically successful, It's now a colonialist. It's now an oppressor. So under this wording, you get these one-sided resolutions against Israel, and the whole world's gone against Israel because it's successful. So as it's being successful as a country, it's now a leading oppressor and colonizer, which is just a narrative that suits a lot of people internationally wanting Israel not to survive. It is also, you can't help it, but in some of these countries, it's anti-Semitism, which is, and you've got to ask yourself, why is there so much anti-Semitism? And so this anti-Semitism has risen in many countries, in many Western countries, not so much Eastern, but Western countries. And that, I don't know why that's happened in Australia and worldwide. In Australia, anti-Semitism has gone up 700% since October the 7th. Worldwide, it's gone up in similar levels, and much more than Islamophobia. And it's also a reflection of the changes of population in Western Europe, but it's also, the ascension of the progressive left and this idea that Israel colonizes and let only that, genocide. So in Gaza has 2 million people. It's the fastest growing population in the Middle East, virtually. But then, so yes, 30,000 people have died, maybe less, maybe more. How many military, how many not, we don't know. But that is and it's a significant number, and it's terrible that anyone dies. But when you have a look at what else is happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Sudan, what's happening worldwide, unfortunately, war brings death. So the fact that Israel is powerful and strong, people have voted against it. And then the media. And the media tends to be on the left, and the left have taken the view, the same thing, colonizers, oppressors, military too strong. We have to find a way for there to be no Israel. The river to the sea does not help you with peace, because we all know what the river to the sea means. It can only mean one thing, and that's no Israel, no Jewish Israel. There will be Israel. The land will stay, but there'll be no Jews in it. So obviously, we feel as a race we're fighting for our survival.
No, you're absolutely right. But on the other hand, the Jews have been there for 5,000 years. They've faced a lot of challenges, but they will continue for posterity, I'm sure. We have time for one more question.
Sure.
What lessons can be learned from the recent conflict that might help prevent future escalations? Because the common person anywhere in the world doesn't like conflict.
Yeah. Look, that's a really difficult question. I actually think next to nothing. I mean, that's a defeatist answer. From a Jewish Israeli perspective, if all the countries around it agree to have secure borders, the conflict finishes tomorrow.
Correct.
If there's, like in Europe, where there's Europe set up a whole lot of things so they wouldn't go to war again after World War II, EU, United Nations, a whole lot of things. So in the Middle East, if you just take the Middle East and take out any external factors, we need to have the Abraham Accords. And not that this is political, but Netanyahu and Trump, who were both vilified for various reasons, they bought these Abraham Accords. And if you actually believe what Trump said, he was only weeks away, with the sanctions were very effective in Iran, from Iran joining them. So if you have an accord in the region, as you have with Egypt since 1974, Jordan since 1994, and now Emirates, none of these countries have said anything, have come out with any strong statements during this war, because there's peace between those countries. And, Morocco, Sudan, the Emirates and Bahrain. So if you can get other countries to move to form an economic bloc in the Middle East, where religion gets, and really, we're talking about old-fashioned feudal religions, and they can become a bloc, like Saudi Arabia wants Israel defense, wants Israel technology. It's setting up a new satellite town in Neom in Saudi Arabia, which is developing all this stuff into the new world where oil is not such a political weapon. Then all of a sudden, if this becomes a trading bloc and a bloc where they have swap ambassadors, this won't be such a melting pot. But there's too many people that don't want this to happen, and now it includes China and Russia and Iran, and anyone who's a Shiite. So all those people have to go. In Israel, they have to control their extreme right, but that's not a majority. The whole country will move right, which means extreme right will be more marginalised because people want safety. But in Israel, in a democracy, that could be preserved because people want to live there and they've got a reason to live and they're not radicalised in that sense. So to stop it, in the end, you have to have economic growth. You have to have people saying there's a better life than being a terrorist. And you have to have people that then have connections where they work with each other and they understand each other. And that is all possible. But that's difficult. The Middle East is not, it's not in the same position as Europe or other countries. I mean, India is progressing at astronomical rate at the moment. And when you have that rate and that progression in a democracy, it'll just happen. But you're really trying to move, in some places, feudal systems, histories that are 40, 50 years behind the West to us, to where we all sit. And it's hard to do that overnight. I mean, they're trying to do it in Saudi because they feel it's their future. If you take Trump's argument, as long as we pump enough oil and gas out of the ground and make them irrelevant, all of a sudden they'll have to work on other ways of producing goods that the rest of the world wants to keep their standard of living up. They have to have high education and the rest of it. So it is complicated. There's a lot of things to change. There's a lot of past things that people are hanging on to that have to be just taken out of their mindset. You have to de-radicalize a lot of people, and they have to be shown there's another way to coexist in the world. But it's a long-winded answer, but it's a hard question.
Absolutely. Well said. And on that note, Pete, thank you so much for speaking to me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on Zoom or in person whenever we meet. But today's conversation has been absolutely fascinating. I thought I understood a little bit of Israel and Palestine, but I clearly did not. Thank you for such an incredible discourse on Israel and Palestine. And thank you also for some amazing perspectives on the recent conflict. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for inviting me, and good luck with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.